From the headquarters of Telesur English in Quito, Ecuador, I am Estefanía Bravo. This is From the South. Former President of Brazil, Luis Ignacio Lula da Silva, has been authorized to leave prison in order to attend the funeral of his grandson, who passed away early on Friday. This follows a back and forth between officials. Our correspondent in Sao Paulo, Brian Meir, has more.
March 1st marks a very sad day in the life of former Brazilian President Luis Ignacio Lula da Silva. Early this morning, his 7-year-old grandson Artur got sick. His family took him to the hospital in Santo André, and hours later he died from meningitis. In January, when Lula's brother Vavá passed away, the local Curitiba courts broke Brazilian law and barred him from attending the funeral. This is a constitutionally guaranteed right in Brazil. In an average year, between 12 to 15,000 prisoners are temporarily released from prison, often in the presence of armed guards, and allowed to visit the funerals of family or loved ones. So as pressure builds on the right-wing Bolsonaro government over a series of corruption scandals and gaffes, it looks like they were unable to bar Lula from going to the funeral today. So basically, after a back and forth between the federal police, the local courts, and the federal public prosecutor's office, authorization was made. They're sending a helicopter to Curitiba as we speak, and it looks like he'll be flown in a small plane from Curitiba to São Paulo, where he will be allowed to go to the funeral of his grandson.
The United States Treasury Department has announced more sanctions against Venezuela, targeting 6 senior officers in the Bolivarian Armed Forces and police. They include the head of the National Guard and the commanders in charge of military and police forces on Venezuela's borders with Brazil and Colombia. The U.S. claims these units used force against civilians last weekend, but video evidence has shown opposition activists inciting violence against soldiers. Earlier, we were joined by Dan Kovalik. He's a professor of international human rights at the University of Pittsburgh. He spoke about how the U.S. has repeatedly meddled in countries around the world and how their support for the Contras in Nicaragua during the 80s could inform their current strategy against the government of Venezuela.
It would not be difficult for the U.S. to use those paramilitaries in some type of Contra effort against Venezuela. Now, what it would look like is very similar to the Contra War in Nicaragua. There's no way these paramilitaries could gain any ground or have any significant success against the Venezuelan military. But they could wreak a lot of havoc, they could kill a lot of people, and they could undermine the economy even further than the U.S. has undermined it by sanctions. So it's very dangerous. And again, unfortunately, in Colombia, the U.S. does have these paramilitary forces that can be used for these purposes, and frankly have been used over the years against Venezuela. And Elliott Abrams was one of the key figures for Ronald Reagan, who helped subvert U.S. law by funding the Contras, by illegal arms sales to Iran, and also through cocaine sales that were used to fund the Contras. At the same time, we have to remember that Mr. Abrams was also a key figure behind the war in El Salvador and behind such massacres as the El Mozote massacre, which claimed the lives of 800 Salvadorans. This is a bad guy. The fact that he is in charge of Venezuelan policy should really give everyone pause.
Social organizations in Paraguay have rallied to protest against the arrival of Venezuelan opposition lawmaker Juan Guaidó to the country. Protesters gathered in front of the Paraguayan Foreign Ministry to demand the government stop supporting a coup in Venezuela. They sent their solidarity to Venezuelans, asking that Latin America remain a region of peace. Following his meeting with President Abdo, Guaidó left for Argentina, where he's meeting with President Mauricio Macri. And following last weekend's failed attempt to force humanitarian aid into Venezuela by the U.S.-backed opposition, both sides of the border are now suffering the consequences. Let's take a look at what happened in Cúcuta, Colombia, after international media left.
This is how the Simon Bolivar Bridge, located on the Colombian-Venezuelan border, looked on Friday, February the 22nd. Fast forward to the 23rd, and that's the state it was left in. And it was the same scenario at the Santander Bridge, located a few kilometers north. As a result of the Colombian-Venezuelan border was closed permanently. Cameras, activists and lawmakers all left, but the aftermath has proven costly.
This situation is only getting worse, because after they closed the border, we lost a lot of activity in our town. We have fewer work opportunities. Informal work is on the rise in Cúcuta. The government gives us nothing, no benefits, so we have very few options.
The city lives of Venezuelans. Our supermarkets are closed. Street vendors are not able to sell their wares. And it's all because Venezuelans are not working anymore. After the concert and the whole circus surrounding it, they have left us in a dire situation.
This attack against Venezuela was carried out with the political and logistical support of Colombian authorities, who openly supported a coup d'etat.
As usual, our city has been left to clean up the mess. Things are much more difficult now. There's more militarization. President Iván Duque was in Cúcuta for 3 days, and he never once mentioned any of the issues in this city. Unemployment, extreme poverty, widespread violence, a border that's at mercy of armed groups in the hands of local drug trafficking gangs. They continue to work here as if nothing has happened.
Cúcuta is strategically located for a possible military invasion of Venezuela.
There are many people who support a military invasion of Venezuela, but they have no idea what war is. They have never visited the region of Catatumbo or other regions where campesinos live, or know how they live. 25,000 campesinos have been evicted from their lands in the north of Santander. About 5,000 people have forcibly disappeared, 217 people last year alone. Here in Colombia, we're living through a real humanitarian crisis.
The coup failed, but the damage done to communities on both sides of the border is apparent.
Venezuela has announced that it will move the European headquarters of state-owned oil company PDVSA from Lisbon to Moscow. The decision was announced by Venezuela's Vice President Delcy Rodriguez after meeting the Russian Foreign Minister in Moscow. Rodriguez also said Europe no longer provides the necessary guarantees to protect her country's assets. Venezuela is also set to sign new trade deals with Russia that will focus on energy, agriculture, and health.
President Nicolás Maduro has ordered that the offices of state-owned oil company PDVSA in Europe, located in Lisbon, be moved to Moscow. This is a way of strengthening our cooperation ties.
Russia will continue to assist the Venezuelan authorities in resolving social and economic problems, including through the provision of legitimate humanitarian aid. In general, we believe that the best way to help Venezuelans is to develop practical, pragmatic, and mutually beneficial interactions.
A gun battle between soldiers and al-Shabaab Islamist fighters has come to an end in Somalia's capital city, leaving at least 20 dead. The raid lasted close to 22 hours and at least 80 people have been injured. The attack started overnight after 2 car bombs went off and gunmen opened fire on a popular area of Mogadishu. Al-Shabaab took credit for the attack, saying they were targeting a hotel, which is usually frequented by government officials. And protesters in Algeria have clashed with police near the presidential palace in the capital, leading to several casualties on both sides. Events unfolded after a protest against the president's bid to stand for a 5th term in the upcoming April elections. The carnage was clearly visible on the streets as police made their way through smoke and several fires. Tens of thousands took part in protest marches across the country. Algerians demonstrating believe that the 81-year-old isn't fit to lead, as he suffered a stroke in 2013 and has rarely been seen public since. A forest fire has destroyed around 80,000 hectares in Mount Kenya, the second highest peak in Africa. The fire has been active for nearly a week and spread due to high temperatures and strong winds. Wildfire rangers, soldiers, and teams of volunteers have been battling against it. Mount Kenya was inscribed as a World Heritage Site in 1997. We'll be back very soon. Stay with us. Welcome back. A fire has destroyed a number of businesses in Berbice in Guyana. The blaze caused extensive damage to a cinema, a restaurant, and 2 stores. Reports say that smoke was first seen coming from the cinema. The flames then spread to an empty building next door. Residents say they tried to extinguish the flames, but the heat from the fire was too much. Liat, once the Caribbean's leading inter-island airlines, is now in serious financial difficulty and needs an emergency cash injection of $5 million to stay afloat. The airline only has enough cash to operate for just over a week and is now facing a possible shutdown if CARICOM does not intervene. Part of the airline's problems is that it has been flying unprofitable routes. Liat will now explore the possibility of economic cooperation with Trinidad and Tobago state-owned Caribbean Airlines.
The heads of government were informed that Liat is in serious financial difficulty, needing, within a matter of a fortnight, an injection of minimum $5 million in order to keep flying. Now, if Liat ceases to fly, I need not tell you the economic and other impact that that would have on the region. I have agreed to allow them to talk with CAL to see whether there is any economic benefit or possibilities for cooperation between CAL and Liat from that standpoint, purely from a business operations.
The groundwork has officially started on a brand new airport in St. Lucia, and its price tag is around $175 million. Prime Minister Alan Chestnut called the project a welcome development and great news for the tourism industry. The airport is slated for completion in 2021. Former Prime Minister Sir James Michel is calling for a ban on cell phones at polling stations in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. He justified his plea by saying that people can go into voting centers and take their photos to prove to politicians that they gave them their vote and demand something in return. He added that voting booths should only have plastic sheeting around them so that everything is done in the open.
The first thing I want to say to you.
An 11-year-old Argentinian girl who was denied an abortion received a C-section this week, sparking a new debate about the country's strict abortion laws. The girl was raped by her grandmother's 65-year-old partner and was requested an abortion. Confusion over the girl's legal guardianship caused a delay until her 23rd week of pregnancy, and at that point, some doctors refused to carry out the procedure. Last August, the Senate rejected a bill to legalize abortion in the first 14 weeks of pregnancy. Hundreds of Argentinians protested in Buenos Aires as President Mauricio Macri delivered a speech at Congress about his economic policies. People have widely rejected Macri's austerity policies, economic recession, and tax hikes. Heavy security personnel was deployed around the capital to face these protests. During his speech, Macri defended his policies and said Argentina is in a better situation than back in 2015 when he took office.
Macri's government clearly defends interests opposed to ours. Students, workers, and everyone who is exploited in this country want a different political answer. That is why we reject Macri.
This government has made an agreement with the International Monetary Fund to bring hunger and misery in health and education.
Our correspondent in Argentina, Edgardo Esteban, has more.
Buenos Aires woke up with thousands of security personnel surrounding Congress, where President Macri spoke about his economic policies. At the same time, social organizations, labor unions, and human rights organizations rallied to protest against those same policies. At first, they decided to protest in front of Congress, but that was impossible due to heavy security presence. People are rejecting a recent price hike imposed by Macri's government on taxes. They are also against the president's speech since it does not reflect the reality of the country.
Thank you, Ricardo, for that. Former executives of the companies involved in building Colombia's troubled Ituango Dam will face criminal charges. Thousands of people had to leave their homes in areas near the dam after serious structural faults were detected.
Colombia's Attorney General is bringing charges against former directors of Hidroituango. They are accused of irregularities in the process of tendering for the building of the dam.
The Attorney General's office announced that it is formally accusing Guillermo Gómez, Hidroituango's former manager, and Luis Javier Duque, the former manager of EPM Ituango, of irregularities in the awarding of contracts.
For his part, the public prosecutor, Fernando Carrillo, told the first public hearing on the case in Medellín that EPM must tell the whole truth about the stability of the dam and its environmental impact.
We are willing to compromise where compromise is possible, but no compromise is possible when it comes to the rights of the Colombian people, the rights of the inhabitants of all the regions affected. When those rights are threatened, then the prosecutor's office will be there to defend the public interest. That's why we will make sure that the whole truth comes to light, and that's why we are insisting on transparency.
Supporters by the affected communities hope that the investigations by both the Attorney General and the Prosecutor's Office produce real results which protect the human lives and the ecosystems that were affected by the dam on the Cauca River.
The prosecutor's office is taking disciplinary action, which we hope will move forward with this hearing. Yesterday, they also agreed the possible participation of the communities, alongside the authorities, in evaluating the damage caused to these communities. So we managed to make more visible the problems of these communities, who were displaced and lost everything.
The Attorney General will also summon for questioning 8 officials of Medellín Public Enterprise, or EPM, and other managers of the Ituango Consortium. Meanwhile, the environmental agency, ANLA, has ordered all the construction work of the dam to cease. Only project to contain the effects of the crisis will be allowed to continue.
Carnival has officially begun in the Brazilian city of Rio de Janeiro. The carnival officially started after the symbolic key to the city was given to Rei Momo, which means the king of misrule. This year, Rei Momo is played by Wilson Neto. The celebrations will run until Saturday, March 9th. The Rio de Janeiro Carnival is one of the most famous in the world, with thousands of people attending each year.
I declare the Carnival of the Marvelous City, Rio de Janeiro, open!
For me, I think that Carnival begins with the Carmelitas, because it's a very traditional block party. We have come here now for 12 years.
And Carnival is also underway in Venezuela, with thousands of people celebrating across the country. President Nicolás Maduro has said this year's Carnival is a celebration of peace, culture, and happiness. Venezuelans took to the streets to dance, sing, and celebrate as the holiday began. And it's also Carnival season in Trinidad and Tobago, and traditional mask characters bring history to life on the streets. That's where some of the remaining vestiges of the original Carnival spirit can be found, true symbols of freedom and resistance. Citizens kicked off Carnival with the reenactment of the 1881 Cambuli riots, the event depicting African resistance to British colonial rule. Meanwhile, the Jab Molasie, their bodies covered in blue paint, devisely threatened to smear spectators. All these traditions recalling the trauma of enslavement. We'll be back very soon. Stay with us. Welcome back. The extradition process of Huawei executive Meng Wanzhou to the U.S. has begun in Canada. Wanzhou is facing criminal charges over alleged violations of sanctions on Iran. Her hearing is on the 6th of March, when evidence will be presented against her, and prosecutors will argue for her extradition. Wanzhou was arrested in Canada on the 1st of December at the request of the U.S. Chilling has intensified in Indian-occupied Kashmir with the latest round of attacks, leaving 7 anti-occupation fighters dead. Skirmishes between both sides on Friday also left at least 1 civilian dead in Mindar, located near the line of control with Pakistan-occupied Kashmir. Hundreds of villagers held a funeral for Amina Akhtar, who was killed by Indian mortar fire. Hostilities between India and Pakistan have also intensified in recent days over the occupied territory of Jammu and Kashmir.
When shellings occurs, who dies? Civilians die. Whose loss is it? It's poor people like us who lose. This is not our doing. This is the doing of political leaders.
Meanwhile, Pakistan has released a captured Indian Air Force pilot. Prime Minister Imran Khan said this was a gesture of peace aimed at easing tensions with its neighbor. Indian citizens and the media gathered at the border to welcome the pilot, who they consider a national hero. A familiar scent can make one feel right at home, and for one Syrian who can no longer return to her country, it made her spend hours building installations that smell just like home. Paris-based Sarah Naim uses olive oil soap bars for her exhibition named Building Blocks to explore the concept of borders, boundaries, and nostalgia. She uses soil and jasmine from her grandmother's garden in Damascus, Syria, as well as other materials to build her artwork. As she can no longer access those materials, she relies on family members from Syria to bring them to her.
The soap actually came from Antakya, which is about 100 kilometers west of Aleppo, because that same factory, it's 6 generations running, it's the oldest factory in Aleppo. It was looted and destroyed, and even the molds had been taken. So it's across the border, and it's not olives. This is olive oil soap. It's not the olive from Syria anymore, it's from Turkey.
Icelanders raise their glasses to say cheers to Happy Beer Day, a day that marks 30 years since the end of a beer ban. The ban started in 1915 when people voted in a referendum to outlaw all alcoholic drinks. However, in 1922, wine was legalized, and then in 1935, all alcoholic drinks were allowed, except for beer due to more than 2% alcohol content. Finally, on the 1st of March 1989, the ban on beer was no more. And with that story, we've come to the end of this news brief. These and other stories, as always, find them on our website at telesurenglish.net. And also join us on social media. We are on Facebook, on Twitter, and on Instagram. For Telesur English, I am Estefania Bravo. Thank you for watching.